Désolé mes chers collègues pour mon retard. La séance est ouverte. L'Assemblée tiendra un débat d'urgence sur questions juridiques et violations des droits de l'homme liées à l'agression de la Fédération de Russie contre l'Ukraine demain matin. Le délai d'amendement a été initialement fixé à ce jour à 10h30. Je demande l'accord de l'Assemblée pour prolonger ce délai à midi aujourd'hui. Y a-t-il des objections ? S'il en est ainsi décidé, l'ordre du jour appelle la présentation et la discussion du rapport Impact environnemental et conflit armé de M. John Howell au nom de la Commission des questions sociales, de la santé et du développement durable. Je vous rappelle que nous devrons en avoir terminé avec l'examen de ce texte, vote inclus à 11h45. Nous devrons donc interrompre la liste des orateurs vers 11h20 afin de pouvoir entendre la réplique de la Commission et de procéder au vote nécessaire. Monsieur le rapporteur, vous disposez d'un temps de parole de 7 minutes pour la présentation de votre rapport et de 3 minutes pour votre réponse aux orateurs. Monsieur le rapporteur, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much. I probably will not take my 7 minutes because the list of speakers in this debate is very long, and I want to get as many people in as possible. The contents of this report, I think, are absolutely important and are crucial. They fit in very well with the Icelandic premiership, the Icelandic chairmanship, I should say, of this council, which has a priority of stressing the importance of the natural environment. And what they say about that is that there must be an exploration of the interrelationship between human rights and the environment. And that is precisely what this paper does. What it does at its heart is move this Council of Europe, to recognizing ecocide as a crime and to put that into our pantheon of crimes that we hold ourselves against. And on page 14 of the report, I have set out how we have approached the issue of ecocide at an international level. It is not a concept for which there is already an exact definition. And we are taking the lead in this fashion for setting out how we wish to approach it. And I think that that is very appropriate that the Council of Europe takes the lead in this fashion and shows that it really has the ability to be able to do that and to take the lead. I set out in great detail how we are approaching that, and the Assembly should therefore advocate for the concept of ecocide to be implemented and made operational through the ongoing revision process of relevant legal instruments. That is a quote from the report, but I think it's a relevant quote from the report. The international legal framework for the issues that are covered by this report are somewhat confused. The international legal framework, if I'm being honest, is a mess when it comes to these sort of issues. But I think it's important that we get the legal framework right. It is only by getting the legal framework right that we can be sure that the actions that we advocate and the actions that we take are correct and set out what is going to happen. And the way that we have approached this report is to look at it in two parts. Firstly, the recommendations apply across the board. They do not apply to a specific country. This is not, for example, a report that is solely about Ukraine. It is every country must fit in to what we are proposing. Every country must adhere to the proposals that we are setting out. That is the sort of approach that we have wished to take. And there are a number of things that are set out in this report. International law provides indirect protection of the environment during armed conflict, only indirect protection of the environment in an armed conflict. And I welcome what the Red Cross has done on instructions in its military manuals. I also commend the work of the International Law Commission of the UN. We did consult the UN during the preparation of this report, and it is welcomed that we are at one with the UN on this, and I believe that will stand us in good stead. We already have several legal instruments to protect the environment, and these are listed in the report. But what we need in order to get ecocide as a crime in this, and what we need in order to make sure that there are gaps, the gaps are filled in this, is we probably need a new treaty or a new convention to be able to go forward. And I think that is a really exciting place to be. It is an exciting place for this Council to be thinking of a new treaty and a new convention in such a crucial part of keeping our world safe, of keeping our world pleasant, and of making sure that our human rights are as protected as they possibly can be. The severe destruction or deterioration of nature that can be qualified as ecocide may occur in both times of peace and of war. And I think it is necessary to recognize that. And we also need to recognize the amendments that are being made or are being proposed for the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So, while we have an impressive international legal arsenal, there are important gaps. There are important gaps that we can recommend to the Committee of Ministers should be taken up by a new treaty, by a new convention. And on that basis, and I'm going to stop there and to allow more people to speak in the debate, but I hope that we have a very positive debate and that we go forward with this as the potential for the future of our continent and of the countries that we love. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le rapporteur. Dans la discussion générale, la parole est à Madame Kivela du groupe GUE.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I want to start by condemning in the strongest terms Russia's attack on Ukraine. Russia's cowardice actions have destroyed so many lives and caused immense suffering and destruction. I have the strongest respect for the Ukrainians and their fight for freedom and right to democracy. I want to thank Mr. Howell for raising also this aspect of war in his timely and balanced report. In times of crisis, the environment is not on the top of people's mind, but in reality, war, debris, polluted waters, and poisoned grounds can make some war-affected areas uninhabitable for decades or even longer. For example, the environmental destruction of Ukraine's farmlands will make it very hard for the farmers to regain their work, and this will have an impact not only in Ukraine, but on food security all over the world. This will hinder Ukraine's recovery, and it will bring with it further social problems on top of the war trauma of the people. Also, the long-term impact on human health cannot be ignored. History has shown that war-related health problems can affect several generations of people. All this will further prolong people's suffering, and all this will impact on recovery and on reconstruction. And warfare also produces emissions, which further escalates climate crisis. The same applies to the military buildup, which leads to increases in pollution. Although the production might happen outside our borders, this also needs to be taken into account when we try to reduce our impact on climate. The report notes that the existing legal framework to protect the environment in time of war is not sufficient. Legislation is one way to try to solve the problem, and the Council of Europe is currently working on a Convention on the Environment and Human Rights, which could include crisis-related aspects under its remit. But in addition to reconstruction, we need to include the responsibility of the aggressor to compensate for the damages it has caused on the environment during the war. And lastly, the report advocates for the international recognition of the crime of ecocide. Our group strongly supports this and hopes to see action towards criminalizing ecocide. Thank you.
Merci Madame la rapporteure. Dans la discussion générale, la parole est à Monsieur Jérémy Corbyn au nom du groupe socialiste.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise on behalf of the Socialist Group to support and welcome this report and compliment John Howell on the incredibly detailed research work that has gone into it. I think it is a very welcome report indeed. The environmental impacts of war never go away. In our own countries, pretty well every country in Europe still finds unexploded ordnance from the Second World War, which causes local huge havoc. And the destruction of many natural places in the Pacific from nuclear testing in the 1940s and 1950s, the destruction of parts of Western USA from nuclear testing, and indeed parts of Central Asia and parts of Russia from nuclear testing have not gone away. The people of Vietnam still have to contend with the effects of Agent Orange many, many decades after that dreadful war had come to a conclusion. More recently, the use of depleted uranium in the Gulf War in 1990 and 1991 has left parts of southern Iraq still contaminated by the poison that has left behind. And as colleagues have pointed out, the awful current war that's going on in Ukraine has caused enormous environmental damage and continues to do so. And the bombing of industrial establishments leads to poisoning of water and resources that go with it, as well as damaging the air and the natural world. And also in Crimea, there has been, as the report points out, excessive drilling for new water wells, which has led to salination of the water supply. So the fundamental damage from conflict goes on for a very long time, and it often isn't appropriate at that time. There are, as the report points out, considerable numbers of conventions that could help with dealing with these issues, but the issues that come up are, one, that we need to recognize this is an issue, and I'm pleased that this report does that. Secondly, that after a conflict has concluded, there must be compensation paid and available for clearing up not just the damage, but also the damage to the natural world and the environment, and new laws are required, as John Howell has pointed out in his report. And that is to recognize that ecocide must become a fundamental in international law. It does require more work on its definition, but it has to be done. Ultimately, it is about the legal empowerment of the natural world and the environment, as COP25 and COP26 pointed out. And by us recognizing the environmental effects of conflict, the long-term damage that's done, and the need to compensate for the damage to the natural world and the environment, I think is a very important step for this body to take. And I welcome this report and hope it will be accepted by the Assembly here today.
Merci, monsieur le rapporteur. La parole est à madame Yelisaveta Jasko au nom du groupe PPE.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much. You know, yesterday we were discussing the crimes of sexual violence. And I'm very glad that today we're discussing other very hard crimes. It's environmental crimes. But I want to say that it doesn't bring only environmental damage. It also brings physical damage and mental damage to the society, to animals, to trees, to all the environment. I want to tell you that we Ukrainians are very connected to our land in every possible way. For us, our soil is our soul. Our farmers are working with the land. Our farmers are not exploiting the land. But what happens if mines are there, if farmers cannot plant their seeds anymore, if it's bombed, if the land is bombed, if the biodiversity is destroyed, what happens then? What happens when the logistics to import, to export grain is ruined? It means that our soil and our soul is damaged. And unfortunately, Putin, aggressor, knows it really well. He's been trying, and the Soviet Union has been trying to delete our memory with our traditions, with our connections to our land. And now the soil is something that is also being used against us Ukrainians, but also against all of you, because he knows that you will suffer from that, because Ukraine, as the place, as a breadbasket, is feeding all the world, and he knows that. I want to ask here that as a result of this conversation and also in a summit, we find a number of things. First, we need investigation of these crimes. We need expertise. Please help us to have this expertise. Bring your experts on the ground. The second one, we need publicity of these crimes. And the third one, let's find that tools that will bring justice on environmental crimes. Because without it, our lives will continue to be destroyed. Do you know how many animals were killed? How many parks, forests are destroyed? We need help also with the demining. Please help us with that. But the main thing, let's find the real tools for justice in environmental crimes, because maybe it could be the European Court, but I think that we need to create new tools, because there are too many crimes, and we need that investigation to bring justice. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Jasko. La parole est à Madame Yulia Oshnikovia au nom du groupe ALDE.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear Mr. Rapporteur, dear Assembly. First of all, let me congratulate Mr. John Howell on the excellent report on the draft resolution, and I'm sure that it's one of the most crucial report and resolution for the Council of Europe today and for the future, when we recognize the right to a healthy environment as a fundamental human right. The main role of the Council of Europe is to be the guardian of human rights and rule of law in times of peace and war. Environmental damage caused by military aggression and war can be multifaceted and mostly irreversible. They affect not only ecosystem, but also human young and human health beyond the conflict area and long after the conflict is over. Nature is always a silent witness and victim of this war, and it's always transbordery. Intensive bombing destroy ecosystem and biodiversity, threatens protected area, dying a lot of animals, fires, Ukrainian forest, all this impact us, our health, our life. All this we see now in Europe, in Ukraine, a full-scale, unprovoked and just military invasion of Russian Federation caused irreparable damage of European country, in particular, the European environment. The war posed new challenges to Ukraine and forced to look for new approaches to ensuring the responsibility of the aggressor country for environmental damage. Human rights and humanitarian law during armed conflict have to be harmonized. In particular, in terms of the human rights for the healthy environmental, we have the strengthened measures to outlaw prohibited weapons, which have disastrous impact on both the environmental and humans. So, and we, of course, welcome introduce the notion of ecocide into a legal matter. When Russian missiles have been destroying European environmental altogether in the Council of Europe, we must do what we are here for. Care for human rights and justice, to recognize and codify the crime ecocide and establish clear and effective legal framework to protect environment and harmful damaging, and persecute if it's happened, the particular during the armed conflict and war. So the Rome Statute to the International Criminal Court must include an ecocide article in real permanent international mechanism to monitoring legal infringement and address compensation claims for ecocide crime and environmental damage. So what the world sees, that there is no real peace where ecocide has taken place and its consequences have been overcome. There is no real peace where genocide takes place and human rights to life is constantly violated, where any child can die from the hidden Russian anti-personnel mine, when children who shout from under the rubble of houses, "Mom, I don't want to die." Dear colleagues, I strongly call to support this resolution and encourage all member states to implement recommendations that will make incredible tectonic changes to protecting human rights to life and healthy environment. Thank you very much.
Merci Madame Ovchinikova. La parole est à Monsieur Oleksiy Goncharenko du groupe CE-AD.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank John Howell for extremely important work. Real bravo, because that is so important to speak today about what's going on, about the possible consequences, especially in the time when, unfortunately, big war is back to Europe, in Ukraine, and Russia is making not only genocide against Ukrainians, but ecocide today that is so dangerous for everybody on the planet. When for the first time in human history, nuclear power plant is occupied by aggressor. The biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and this is a nuclear blackmailing and all other awful things which are happening. So that is extremely at time, that is extremely important topic. But I want to stress one more thing. When we're speaking about environmental results of the war, we should say why it could become real, why the war happened. Because we were speaking here and in many other stages for years about environment, about the dangers to environment, but at the same time we were not speaking about dangers to security. And now we have what we have. And when people like Greta Thunberg are attacking coal mines, saying, oh, this is bad to have coal mine in Europe, and at the same time Putin is sitting and waiting, wow, great, you're doing a great job for me. You're making them more dependent from me because I will never let you go to my fossil fuel mines or anything else. And he uses these people and they think they're doing a good job, but they're doing quite opposite. They are attacking world order, security first. Without world order, without international law, there will be no environment, there will be no normal human life. Dictators, autocracies, they don't care about environment. Look at Putin, look at China, look at other countries. They don't care. They don't care. Only free people with democracy, with the rule of law, with human rights, they care about the environment. They fight for environment. So the first thing is to defend the world order, to defend the international law. And the main ecologists today in the world, the main fighters for environment, are Ukrainian soldiers and officers, Ukrainian tanks crew, Ukrainian pilots in fighter jets who are defending The water is very important for all of us. We will defend the international order, we will defend rule of law, we will defend human rights, and after this, together with you, like a free nations, like free people, we will defend environment. It couldn't go another way. So I want us all to remember this, and I want us all to support this very important report and to defend what is really important. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Goncharenko. La parole est à Monsieur Raphaël Houssenov.
Dear colleagues, unfortunately, this is not the first time this topic has been debated, and what is double unfortunate is that the possibility of continuing such discussions in the future is obvious. The reason is that big and small conflicts continue uninterruptedly on our continent and throughout the world, as well as wars and armed confrontations, in addition to all the other impacts, also cause long healing and, in some cases, irreparable wounds to the environment. These problems are well known to us in painful details as a representatives of a country that 20% of whose territory has been occupied for almost 30 years and whose nature has been seriously damaged in the process. Last summer, I was horrified when, for the first time, I visited the territories of Azerbaijan, finally liberated from aggression, and thousands of kilometers of land seemed to have come to a state after an atomic war. Everything had been destroyed. Not a single stone had been left on the stone. And all buildings, monuments, vegetation, forests, and trees had been destroyed along with everything that rose above the ground. In place of centuries-old forests, now exist desert plains, the soil of which is scorched. Instead of destroyed buildings, roads, bridges, much better ones can be created than a few years ago. Nevertheless, it takes centuries to restore the destroyed nature and the wounded ecology. At the end of last year, a large group of environmentalists who perhaps were better and more professionally informed how much damage the war and environmental aggression had caused to the nature of Azerbaijan started protests in the territories of Azerbaijan where the Russian peacekeeping contingent was temporarily stationed, demanding an end to the aggravation of the ecological situation, the plunder of the wealth of Azerbaijan, and the arbitrariness of the Armenians. Because during the 30-year Armenian occupation of Azerbaijani territories, environmental terrorism had been committed against Azerbaijan in the economic regions of Karabakh and East Zangezur, as well as many mineral deposits has been illegally exploited. In my opinion, the voice of people protesting against environmental attacks, which appear many times more threatening than territorial occupation, should always be raised in all conflict regions, because the impact of conflicts and wars on the environment always spans a wider geography than it seems and recognizes no boundaries. Therefore, the fight against such situations should not be limited only to people in places where the conflicts occur, but should become a common movement that unites efforts. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Houssenov. La parole est à Madame Petra Behr.
Ja, herzlichen Dank für diesen wirklich wichtigen Bericht. Ich möchte ausschließlich auf die Aspekte bezüglich Internationalen Strafgerichtshof eingehen, wo ja der Ökozid das 5. Verbrechen wäre, neben Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit, Kriegsverbrechen, Genozid und Aggression. Ich hielte das für einen sehr, sehr wichtigen Schritt und es gibt auch einen sehr konkreten juristischen Vorschlag, wie dieses Verbrechen gefasst sein könnte, wo es darum ginge, dass rechtswidrige oder mutwillige Handlungen bestraft werden würden, die schwere, weitreichende und langfristige Schäden an der Umwelt mit sich führen täten oder negative Auswirkungen auf das Leben von Menschen und auf die kulturellen und wirtschaftlichen Ressourcen der Erde hätten. Darunter würden dann zum Beispiel fallen, um jetzt historische Beispiele von außerhalb Europas zu bemühen, das Abholzen des Amazonas oder die Reaktorkatastrophe von Fukushima, genauso wie der Chemieunfall im indischen Bhopal vor vielen Jahrzehnten. All das würden diese Straftatbestände erfüllen. Ich hatte die Möglichkeit im November, glaube ich, mit Piotr Hofmanski, er ist der Vorsitzende des Internationalen Strafgerichtshofs, darüber zu sprechen, wie sehr sich denn der ICC auch vorstellen kann, dass Ökozid subsumiert wird in das Römerstatut. Und das können die sehr gut. Also da gibt es eigentlich offene Türen, die wir einlaufen. Es gibt schon seit vielen Jahren eigentlich Initiativen zu diesem 5. Verbrechen des ICC. Und ich denke, wenn dieser Bericht jetzt wirklich zum Anlass genommen werden könnte, dass Mitgliedstaaten des Europarats, die auch Mitgliedstaaten im Römerstatut sind, wirklich diesen Antrag stellen und wirklich schauen, es bedarf nur unter Anführungszeichen 2/3 der Staaten, der Mitgliedstaaten, die zustimmen, das Römerstatut zu erweitern, dann wäre das ein ganz, ganz wichtiger erster Schritt in Richtung Internationalen Strafgerichtshof. Ich weiß selbst, dass natürlich auch das Kampala Amendment, als die Aggression als 4. Straftatbestand in das Römerstatut eingeführt hat, sehr langwierig war zu implementieren und sehr langwierig war, wirklich auch die dementsprechenden juristischen Rahmenbedingungen zu setzen. Aber gerade deswegen ist es so wichtig, jetzt damit zu beginnen, dass möglichst bald auch wirklich der Ökozid Teil des Römerstatuts wird und geahndet werden kann. Danke für die Initiative und ich rufe wirklich alle Mitgliedstaaten, die auch beim ICC sind, und das sind doch einige, auf, wirklich aktiv zu werden. Vielleicht können wir uns da auch koordinieren und zusammenschließen und sehr schnell eine gemeinsame Initiative starten.
Merci Madame Baird. La parole est à Madame Katia Dekanoid.
Merci, Mr. Président. First of all, let me congratulate the rapporteurs because, I mean, it was definitely excellent and very important topic. And, but I have to underline that it would be futile to speak here and condemn violation of the Paris Agreement or any other international climate accord or environmental standard. As a regime that still rapes and murders will also actively violate every human right in a conflict, including the right to clean environment. It may take years for anyone to fully scale the environmental damage caused by the Russian invasion in Ukraine. The carbon footprint will be unprecedented. What we can observe, however, is a precedent we unfortunately already have. Because of the violent Russian destruction of Chechnya, a third of its agricultural lands became unusable. But this is nothing compared to the evidence we already have from Ukraine. Heavy metals containment, both water and sources and soil, pollutants from explosions are carried by air, and I was a witness just coming from the Zaporozhye just a few days ago. The empire of evil should not think it can avoid the environmental consequences of this war. Let us all remember here that thousands of Caspian souls have died as a result of Russian missile launches. We still don't know the extent of the damages suffered by Russian invaders as they occupied Chernobyl. The world has been flirting too close to a nuclear tragedy with the occupation of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And just recently, the Speaker of Russian Duma, probably several days ago, once again threatened the world with the use of nuclear weapon again. Let's remember how many mines are at the soil of Ukraine. When the time comes to bring Russia to justice, and it will come for sure when Ukraine will win, we need to make sure that environmental violations are also considered as violations of human rights as the war crimes. To a large extent, the environmental damages of the conflict will continue to impact Ukraine and all Europe for years, if not generations, after the war ends and after Ukraine's victory. I have to underline also that Georgia, my country, is a prime example of the environmental tragedy that conflict can bring. The fauna and flora are disappearing from Abkhazia and Skin Valley region. These are the occupied territories. Complete mismanagement of water sources in occupied territories has a direct impact on the people. In many villages, streams that once used to be large sources of fishing and irrigation are now completely dry. And let me just remind the society here that in Abkhazia, Bedwinta, 15 hectares of sea space and 186 hectares of land are handed over to Russian Federation. All buildings and structures will become the priority of the Russian Federal Protective Service. It's a land of Georgia, land of Georgian people. And Russia will get 49-year lease on the Black Sea region and neighboring areas. This is an emergency that I call on the Assembly to help Ukraine, Georgia. And I have to underline also the part of the Enguri station, power plant station, also located on the occupied territory. Thank you.
Merci Madame Dekanoïdz. La parole est à Madame Ruth John.
Mr. President, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in this important debate on the environmental impact of armed conflict across our world. And I thank the rapporteur, my colleague John Howell, for compiling this well-researched and comprehensive document. I serve as one of the shadow environment ministers in the United Kingdom, and so this is an issue of great importance to me and my colleagues and many in my country. As a world, we've always counted the sad casualties of war in terms of the dead and wounded soldiers, and of course civilians, men, women and children. We count the destroyed cities and the broken livelihoods, but far too often, for far too long, the environment has remained a hidden victim of war. Over the years, parties to armed conflicts have polluted water, torched crops, cut down forests, poisoned soils and killed animals to gain military advantage. This is an important point and we must never forget. Indeed, environmental degradation and destruction from conflicts not only takes a toll on nature itself, but it also exacerbates food and water insecurity and destroys businesses, lives and futures. There are examples right across our world of famine and disaster occurring in the wake of military conflict. We must recognise the environmental damage that threatens the well-being, health and survival of local populations, and this increases their vulnerability for years and even decades. Furthermore, as the Geneva Environment Network indicates, at least 40% of all internal conflicts over the last 60 years have been linked to the exploitation of natural resources, whether high-value resources such as timber, diamonds, gold and oil, or scarce resources such as fertile land and water. Conflicts involving natural resources have also been found to be twice as likely to relapse, and for that we must all remain ever vigilant. The UK has a proud record of stepping out and standing up to support communities and nations in trouble and in the eye of the conflicts, and I will be encouraging ministers in the UK government to do more and go further. But we must all do more, and that is why the Council of Europe is so important. We must lead by example, we must never walk by on the other side, and we must show that we care. The Conflict and Environment Observatory put it well when they said, the environmental impact of war begins long before they do. Building and sustaining military forces consumes vast quantities of resources. These might be common metals or rare earth metals, water or hydrocarbons. Maintaining military readiness means training, and training consumes resources. There's so many other things to say, but I think the strongest point is this. War has unimaginable impacts on people's lives and the future of our planet. Let that be the one thing we remember, and together, let's change our world for the better. Thank you.
Merci Madame John. La parole est à Madame Margaret de Boer.
Thank you, Chair. The impact of war is enormous. People die by weapons that are used, both soldiers and civilians. People get wounded by these same weapons. People lose family and friends. People have to leave their home, or what is left of it, or their country. The weapons that are used by the aggressor are not only military weapons. Hunger and cold are used as weapons, as is sexual violence, as we discussed yesterday. But also destroying nature, natural resources, and a healthy environment is part of many wars, sometimes as collateral damage, but often on purpose. It is good and important that this report acknowledges this ecocide as a war crime. The impact of war is long-lasting. It takes decades to rebuild cities, hospitals, schools, infrastructure. It takes generations to overcome trauma, grief, hatred, and distrust. but destroying ecosystems can be forever, with devastating effects for plants, animals, biodiversity, landscape, and in the end, humans. The recommendations made by the rapporteur are very precise. Use the legal framework that is already in place and fill in the gaps. And I think both are important because we can do much with what we already have, but it is not sufficient. I want also to underline the importance of the recommendation of the rapporteur to establish domestic and regional solutions to provide relief to environmental refugees fleeing a military conflict. Given the legal vacuum on this matter, this is also very important. And I would add, we should provide relief to all refugees of war and to all environmental refugees. And one last remark, I would also plea to recognize ecocide not only as a crime of war, but also in general as a crime against humanity, also when it's not taking place inside a war. Thank you.
Merci Madame Debord. La parole est à Monsieur Nuno Carvalho.
Thank you, Mr. President. The impact of these situations in war is huge, concerning all the devastation that we may see in the future regarding crops that no longer exist, regarding water that is no longer drinkable. But the main issue here is to prevent these situations, and the main issue here is also to uncovering what these impacts might do in the future, but condemning now these same impacts of these crimes that are made in war. The fact is that we can see devastations of all these impacts in terms of the economy, in terms of the recovering of the social structure of countries that are affected by war. And so this is a very, very, very important matter, because it not only changes the faces of countries that are affected by them, it changes the societies, because the impacts are in several sectors. So it is very, very important for us to eliminate this gap and to tackle this problem right now, because the footprint that we see in the future is huge, and it goes on by a long time. It affects several generations. So we might think that we only see the impacts of war in the first impact that we can see through all the horrors that affect directly people. But environmental acts, criminal environmental acts that are driven by war are also something that absolutely smashes a society, that eliminates the opportunity of recovery. Like I said, we are talking about economy. We're talking about the future in terms of food production. We're talking about what is essential for a country to exist. And if you redraw what is essential for a country, you also redraw the character of a country. You also redraw the identity of the country. So, in that way, this is something that affects and impacts in all sectors that you might imagine of what makes us a country, of what makes us a culture. So, I congratulate the rapporteur for this report, because what we are discussing now is something that we now feel, now know, but most of all, it's not only debating what we can save of the planet. We need to debate what have we lost to make sure that we will not keep losing. And in times of war, we cannot forget the impacts of the environmental. Thank you very much.
Merci Monsieur Carvalho. La parole est à Madame Lesia Vassilenko.
And a very big thank you to our rapporteur. When John Howell took up this topic for report back in 2020, John, you really stood up for the environment, which truly is a silent victim of war. The report covers a wide spectrum of environmental damage that wars cause. Air pollution, water pollution, nuclear insecurity, contamination of landmines, biodiversity depletion, it's all in there. In Ukraine alone, the damage to the environment resulting from Russia's war is estimated at $46 billion. And every year, Russia's aggression produces over 40 million tons of CO2 emissions, which is equivalent actually to the annual production of CO2 emissions of a whole separate country, Bulgaria, for example. There's another major problem that I would like to address also that is not really covered in this report, but is very important for Ukraine. And that problem is of demining. 30% of Ukraine is covered in landmines and explosives. That's 300,000 ordnances over 174,000 square kilometers of land. That's basically, if you want to put it into context, almost the whole of the UK covered in remnants of war. This spreads over areas of farmland, woodland, over urban areas, cities, towns, villages. Recently, the occupied areas are the areas which pose most risks to the livelihood of humans. Men, women, and especially children are admitted on a daily basis with wounds from explosives. This is why the number of civilian casualties also grows in Ukraine. The problem of demining extends to a much more global level, however, than just Ukraine. Unless enough equipment is procured and enough personnel is trained in Ukraine, the fields in Ukraine will not be ready for the farmers to plant by springtime. And this will lead to a domino effect of massive, massive problems extending far beyond the territory of Ukraine, far beyond the territory of Europe, but over to Africa, the Middle East, and boomeranging back into Europe. These problems, I will name them. They are famine, they are mass migration, and everything that spurs from this. Now, to solve this issue, there's a little piece of homework that I would like us to go away with after this report. It's actually to talk to our governments about increasing the pot for demining operations in Ukraine and beyond. To date, this financial pot is almost dry, and I think every single one of us can go back home and talk to the governments to help procure the necessary equipment for Ukraine, to help procure the necessary training for Ukraine. It's small, but it will help. It will help save lives in Ukraine, but it will also help produce a stability of a global kind. Thank you.
Merci Madame Vassilenko. La parole est à Madame Boglarka Ilyes.
Chairman, dear political assembly. The war, which has been erupted almost for a year, has shocked the whole world. I wouldn't believe that my generation has to experience what our grandparents wanted to forget. But they had told us, in order to not happen again. It could be the biggest tragedy of this decade that we couldn't prevent, but now our main task has to be saving human lives, facilitating the peace. Wars and armed conflicts are not only tend to damage our environment, but also ruin the living conditions of people. Imagine, how long can we bear without nourishing soil, drinking water, or clean air? But neither the war nor the preparations and after effects save them. And above all, could we imagine a long-lasting peace if life-saving natural resources would be damaged? The CO2 emissions of the biggest militaries and armed facilities are bigger than the sum of all countries. For example, a T-72 tank burns more than 200 liters on 100 kilometers. And I haven't mentioned about ground contamination, which can spread thousands of kilometers, and war damages or threats to the safety of nuclear power plants by military occupation. Above all, I'm representative of such a country, which is the neighborhood of the conflict zone. And I was born next to the second biggest river of Hungary, the Tisza, which comes from Ukraine and which is one of our national treasures. Since the outbreak of the war, public waste transport services have been interrupted in an increasing number of municipalities in Ukraine, so that during the rising water levels, a cumulative amount of illegally dumped waste arrive in our country on this river. So Hungary is expressing its deep concern for the devastating effects of the Russian military invasion of Ukraine in terms of loss of human lives, severe environmental damages with regards to the dramatic effects of increased climate change, and mass migration from starving regions. We agree that the Council of Europe seized the momentum of enhanced political attention to the vital link between human rights and the environment, and we support the Council of Europe to address the possibility to develop a new ecocide crime at international level, even in a convention. Collective action is essential to tackle multiple and interconnected crises, from food to pandemic recovery, from energy to finance, and will allow us to focus more on achieving sustainable development goals and supporting the most vulnerable countries. And last but not least, I would like to congratulate Mr. Howell for this excellent report. Thank you for your attention.
Merci Madame Idiès. La parole est à Madame Sibel Arslan.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Auch ich möchte mich ganz herzlich beim Berichterstatter, Herrn Howell, für diesen Bericht danken. Bewaffnete Konflikte und Kriege vernichten Menschenleben und schädigen unsere Umwelt. In Friedenszeiten gibt es auch Unternehmen, die Fabriken und industrielle Anlagen darin unterstützen, dass sie verhindern, dass weder Luft noch Wasser noch Boden verschmutzt wird. In Kriegszeiten hingegen können diese zerstörten Industrieanlagen gar nicht besucht werden, und weil es nicht besichtigt werden kann, um die Kontamination zu untersuchen, ist es auch schwierig, hier genaue Zahlen zu nennen. Am 24. März hatten russische Soldaten ein Öldepot südwestlich von Kiew in Brand gesetzt. Das Feuer brannte tagelang und verbrannte 5.800 Tonnen Öl, die in Tanks gelagert waren. Das Öl verbreitete sich auf den umliegenden landwirtschaftlichen Feldern und verschmutzte große Flächen. Und was bedeutet es, wenn Öl in den Boden sickert? Es kann die Wurzeln von Pflanzen bedecken und es führt dazu, dass der Boden kein Sauerstoff aufnehmen kann. Der Boden kann kein Sauerstoff aufnehmen. Auch die Landminen, welche die Russen in der Umgebung des Atomkraftwerks Tschernobyl hinterlassen haben, könnten in der Zukunft sehr viele Menschen und Tiere verstümmern und töten. Minen, die überall in Kriegsgebieten vorkommen. Die Auswirkungen solcher Verschmutzungen oder Verbrechen wirken also lange noch für uns. Diejenigen, die unser Ökosystem, die Biodiversität, die Tiere und das Anrecht für ein gesundes Umwelt zerstören, die sollen auch in Rechenschaft gezogen werden. Den Genfer Konventionen zufolge ist es untersagt, Methoden oder Mittel anzuwenden, die darauf abzielen, der natürlichen Umwelt weitreichende, dauernde und schwere Schäden zuzufügen. Umweltschäden können vielfach ernsthaft, langfristig und unwiderruflich sein. Nicht nur Ökosysteme, sondern auch die menschliche Gesundheit ist davon betroffen. Deshalb danke ich für diesen Vorschlag, das Ökozid als Kriegsverbrecher einzuführen. Vielen Dank nochmals für diesen außerordentlich guten Bericht.
Merci Madame Arslan. La parole est à Monsieur Alain Milon.
Merci Monsieur le Président. Merci à notre collègue John Owen pour ce rapport qui met en lumière les sévères dommages que les guerres peuvent causer à l'environnement et par conséquent à l'homme et à sa santé. À l'heure où notre Assemblée se mobilise en faveur d'un droit à un environnement sain afin qu'il constitue un droit fondamental, il était particulièrement opportun de s'intéresser à la manière dont pourraient être caractérisés et sanctionnés les dommages causés à l'environnement dans le cadre de conflits armés. La guerre qui fait rage aujourd'hui nous rappelle cruellement les enjeux de cette question. Au regard du rapport de notre collègue, le cadre juridique international me semble insuffisant. Les conventions du Conseil de l'Europe ayant pour objectif de protéger l'environnement ne visent pas explicitement les dommages causés par un acte de guerre et parfois même excluent explicitement ces contextes. Certes, des mesures de protection directe et indirecte de l'environnement en période de conflit armé sont prévues par la Convention des Nations Unies relative à l'interdiction d'utiliser des techniques de modification de l'environnement à des fins militaires ou toute autre fin hostile, ainsi que par le protocole additionnel aux Conventions de Genève relatif aux protections des victimes des conflits armés internationaux. Mais il m'apparaît nécessaire que le Conseil de l'Europe et ses États membres s'impliquent davantage. Et je me réjouis donc que le Comité des ministres se soit saisi de cette question dans sa recommandation adoptée le 27 septembre dernier. Les États membres de notre organisation doivent, à mon sens, ratifier la Convention des Nations Unies sur l'interdiction d'utiliser des techniques de modification de l'environnement à des fins militaires ou toute autre fin hostile, ainsi que le protocole Grand 1 aux Conventions de Genève. En tant que parlementaires, nous avons le devoir de jouer un rôle en la matière. Enfin, il sera nécessaire de veiller à ce que la version révisée de la Convention sur la protection de l'environnement par le droit pénal du Conseil de l'Europe s'applique aussi dans le contexte de conflits armés en temps de guerre ou en cas d'occupation. Notre Assemblée doit évidemment soutenir et prendre part à cette mobilisation et je voterai ce projet de résolution sans réserve. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Million. La parole est à Monsieur Jean-Pierre Grain.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues. L'excellent rapport de notre collègue John Howell met en lumière les différents impacts sur l'environnement de tous les conflits armés. Il souligne que la protection de l'environnement est limitée lors des guerres et plaide pour la reconnaissance internationale du crime d'écocide et sur des mesures visant à interdire l'utilisation d'armes prohibées qui ont un impact dévastateur sur l'environnement et les humains. Comme il est relevé dans le rapport, entre 1955 et 1975, la guerre au Vietnam a été le théâtre de destruction très importante de l'environnement durable et, pour certains, irréversible. Un véritable scandale qui a conduit les Nations Unies en 1976 à adopter un nouvel instrument juridique relatif à la protection de l'environnement en période de conflit armé. Mais cela n'a pas suffi. Lors de la guerre du Kosovo, les bombardements dans les Balkans ont eu des répercussions néfastes sur différents écosystèmes, sur des zones protégées. Les forêts, les sols et l'air ont subi une pollution sans précédent. L'escalade actuelle des hostilités par la Fédération de Russie en guerre totale a étendu les dommages aux infrastructures et à l'environnement dans de nombreuses régions d'Ukraine. Une préoccupation immédiate, c'est la sûreté des centrales nucléaires soumises volontairement ou involontairement à des attaques de missiles ou des perturbations lors de certaines opérations de maintenance. Un autre problème relevé par notre collègue Vazichenko qui concerne l'après-conflit. C'est les mines antipersonnelles qui subsistent cachées dans le sol et qui sont des dangers permanents pour les exploitations agricoles ou toute autre utilisation du sol. Ces mines restent actives de très nombreuses années et font de nombreuses victimes innocentes. Le déminage des terrains est une opération délicate et dangereuse, avec aggravation pour les dégâts sur la nature et par surprise par les humains ou les animaux. Chers collègues, la nature est une victime silencieuse, sans défense, lors de la destruction délibérée d'installations de production agricole, culture, canaux d'irrigation, puits et pompes, et j'en passe. Tous ces dégâts mettent à mal la production de nourriture, provoquent des famines et déséquilibrent de nombreux écosystèmes pour de très longues années. Comme les discussions au sein de la Commission l'ont démontré, l'idée d'incorporer la notion d'écocide dans l'ordre juridique international suscite le plus grand intérêt politique. Le projet de résolution de ce rapport le soutient pleinement, car il est urgent que les droits humains à la vie et à un environnement sain soient reconnus et plus bafoués. Notre Assemblée doit impérativement inciter les États membres à prendre toutes les mesures nécessaires pour rendre illégale et passible de poursuites pénales l'utilisation dans les conflits d'armes interdites qui ont un impact disproportionné sur l'environnement et qui rendent toute vie impossible dans les zones affectées. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Merci, Monsieur Grain. La parole est à Madame Nigar Arpadaray.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, armed conflicts remain an important cause of environmental damage, leading to food and water insecurity, loss of livelihoods, and biodiversity loss. Wars have devastating effect on the environment. We in Azerbaijan know that very well, unfortunately. As a result of Armenian occupation, Azerbaijani cities and villages have been destroyed. A number of cities were completely destroyed and subsequently dismantled to the last stone. Once a beautiful city, Aghdam was called Hiroshima of the Caucasus by international media due to the scale of destruction. Unique endemic forests of Zangilan region were chopped down by occupants. Irrigation systems were totally destroyed in Jabrail and Fizuli regions. Springs and wells have been destroyed. Rivers have been polluted. Hundreds of kilometers of Azerbaijani lands were turned into trenches and military bunkers. The scars of occupation will remain for many years to come. Armenia's occupation have inflicted long-term and irreversible damage on the environment of Azerbaijan. This aside, Azerbaijan's national resources were being exploited illegally for many years. This is one of the reasons why Azerbaijani eco-activists run a peaceful protest action on their own soil on Lachin Road, a road connecting Armenia to part of Karabakh under temporary control of Russian military and where remnants of Armenian occupying forces still hide. Eco-activists demand ecological monitoring in the region and prevention of illegal exploitation of Azerbaijan's natural resources. This is their right. Dear colleagues, after more than 2 years since the end of war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Azerbaijani public asks question, why is Azerbaijani natural resources being exploited illegally by remnants of Armenian army? Why is Armenia still openly finances its puppet regime in Karabakh, including purchase of landmines, ammunition, and salaries of militants? There are serious reasons for the ongoing action. The purpose of the Lachin Road is provide for passage of people and goods during the transitional post-war period. But for the last 2 years, the road has been extensively used to transport Armenian soldiers, military supplies, including landmines and ammunition. It was widely used to transport Azerbaijani natural resources, metal ore and gold from Karabakh to Armenia illegally without any governmental monitoring. And now Armenian side is trying to create this fake story in order to start again unchecked supply of weapons and transportation of gold and ore from Karabakh to Armenia. Dear colleagues, we respect our obligations, but we have under no obligation to allow illegal exploitation of Azerbaijan's natural resources and unchecked transfer of weapons and military or any other stuff in contradiction to our laws. Because Lachin Road and Peace of Karabakh, where Russian soldiers are now stationed, are Azerbaijani soil where Azerbaijani constitution must work. The sooner the better. Mr. Howells, this is an excellent report. I'm thanking you, especially for the fact that you would like to, you propose to create a competent body to study the feasibility and legal instrument for all these subjects. Thank you very much for raising this up.
Merci Madame Arpadaray. La parole est à Monsieur Paul Gavan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I want to begin by warmly welcoming this report and congratulating the rapporteur, John Howells. There's an awful lot of detailed research here. I think it's important to recognise that work. I think the key message from your report is that the International Criminal Court now needs to move to call for the international recognition of the crime of ecocide. As we know, they currently exercise jurisdiction over crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, and the crime of aggression. And it's very clear from the detail of the report that this is a move that needs to be made. Indeed, I know the Irish government has been active in terms of environmental issues while they had a seat at the UN Security Council. I know they're currently looking at this issue, and I would encourage them to clearly come out after this report is hopefully adopted, hopefully unanimously today. I want to see the Irish government come out and support that call so that we can make further progress internationally on the issue. You give a number of examples in terms of the damage done. The Kosovo one has been cited a few times, where industrial sites and energy installations were damaged by bombing or missile strikes. The destruction and fires at these sites caused serious damage to the country's natural environment. The bombing affected ecosystems, surface water, groundwater, protected areas, forests, landscapes, soil and air in the Balkans that were contaminated in an unprecedented manner. Over 100 toxic substances were involved, including ordnance containing depleted uranium used by NATO in several operations. And of course, there's growing amount of evidence that the dispersion of depleted uranium can be linked to the increased incidence of aggressive cancers, such as leukemia, among the local population, military personnel and peacekeepers. Others have mentioned, rightly so, the Vietnam War and Agent Orange. And of course, we need to bear in mind the current war in Ukraine and the huge environmental damage inflicted by that particular conflict. The one I also want to mention, though, is in relation to Yemen and the huge damage that's been done by Saudi Arabia. They've continuously bombed infrastructure like desalination plants, dams and reservoirs, depriving communities of easy access to water. Indeed, I might just mention that for a body that focuses on human rights, I'm always surprised at how rarely Saudi Arabia gets a mention in this chamber, given their appalling record in terms of human rights and that disgraceful war that's going on there at the moment. It's worth, in the last few seconds I have, just focusing on a few facts in terms of the impact of military on our environment. Militaries consume enormous amounts of fossil fuels. Bombing and other methods of modern warfare directly harm wildlife and biodiversity. Pollution from war contaminates bodies of water, soil and air. And of course, warfare releases greenhouse gas emissions. One startling fact that I'll leave you with is that if the US military were a country, it would have the 47th highest emissions total worldwide. And bombings and other methods of modern warfare directly harm wildlife and biodiversity. So this is an important report. I hope it gains widespread support. And again, I want to recognise the work of the rapporteur.
Merci, Monsieur Gavan. Il nous faut maintenant interrompre. Ah, on me dit qu'on peut encore prendre un orateur. Donc, la parole est à Madame Inka Opsu.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, first of all, thank you very much for the important report and congratulations to Mr. Howell. The war in Ukraine is a shocking humanitarian crisis. My thoughts are with the Ukrainians and all who suffer because of war. War also has an impact on the environment, which can be seen very concretely in Ukraine. The country of huge environmental diversity is home to tens of internationally significant wetlands. All this is under threat as acts of war raise the risk of forest fires, and toxic waste of ammunition pollutes important water sources. The environment suffers from the effect of tanks, broken war machinery, and even nuclear waste. In addition to human suffering, the environmental impact of war will have far-reaching consequences. The environmental impact of war is not limited to Ukraine's borders. As countries are struggling to ensure energy security, the temptation to water down emission targets and climate change measures increase. In Finland, the war in Ukraine increases logging as forestry companies must seek alternatives to Russian wood to cover for the lack of wood chips and an energy source. We can also see the shift in Finland's peat policy. This is very unfortunate, as peat is known to have dire effects on the climate and the environment. It increases emissions. It is evident that the energy crisis forces us to find alternative energy sources, but we must not do this at the cost of cutting emissions and fossil fuels. Ensuring energy security and tackling climate change are two problems with one solution: sustainable renewable energy. Developing renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power are the best ways forward in reducing greenhouse gases. All investments should now be directed towards these technologies at the same time as we should encourage energy efficiency and saving. Dear colleagues, in the same way as we have convictions for the war crimes and genocide, we need to be able to bring before the courts also the worst environmental criminals and destructors of the environment and convict them of ecocide. Including such a crime into international law may not stop crimes against the environment, but it might obstruction such acts. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Opsu. Il nous faut maintenant interrompre l'audition des orateurs. Les orateurs inscrits qui, présents dans le débat, n'ont pu s'exprimer, peuvent transmettre dans les 4 heures leur intervention dactylographie au service de la séance pour publication au compte-rendu. Ce texte ne doit pas dépasser 400 mots et doit être transmis par voie électronique. J'appelle la réplique de la Commission. Monsieur le rapporteur, vous avez la parole pour 3 minutes.
I thank you very much for this debate, and I thank everyone who has spoken. It has been quite emotional for me to hear such tributes to the debate that we have heard. And I'd just like to read you an email that is typical of the emails that I have received on this. It's from somebody who says, I am a law professor currently seconded to an organization in a member country. He says the idea of combining on the one hand the effective and crossed implementation of human rights and humanitarian law, and on the other hand, the international recognition of the crime of ecocide is a strong and crucial idea. And I want to congratulate you and thank you for the quality of your report entitled Environmental Impact of Conflicts. I just wanted to read that because that is typical of the responses that I have had. I am aware that many people have spoken about the effect essentially of ecocide in Ukraine. And I have been a great supporter of Ukraine right from the very beginning. But I would just point out what I said at the beginning, that the purpose of this report is to cover all countries, not one specific country, but to make sure that all of their activities are included within it. What is the point of this? People can ignore it. People can say, go to hell. I think one of the speakers, I can't remember which one it was, made the point very clearly. We have to stand up for what we believe in. We have to stand up for the things that are important to us. And that may well mean that we can bring to account the people who go against those values that we hold dearly. And if that helps to solve the problems of the environmental effects in times of armed conflicts, then I will be very pleased. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le rapporteur. Madame Sayek-Bock, présidente de la Commission, désire-t-elle répondre?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So as the chair of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development, I'd like to extend our gratitude and congratulations to our rapporteur as well as our secretariat for having put forth a report that was extremely well received at this plenary. So I think the debate we've had is proof of the work that has been done, but more so the proof of the need for this work to have been done. So as I say, the debate itself has spoken many of the words that I just want to underline and reiterate. First of all, this report takes stock of the necessity of taking into account the immense destruction armed conflict and war is putting on globally. Human lives, the environment, biodiversity is being destroyed. So it is our duty as a leader of an organization seeking to protect and promote human rights, rule of law, and democracy to ensure that not only do we avoid such destruction, but in case it occurs, we ensure that human rights and humanitarian aspects of the issue is coordinated and ensured in unison. So this report not only takes stock of this need, but it also takes stock of the role that we have played as an organization in being a pioneer to ensure that a healthy environment is sought out as a critical part of our human rights. But it also takes stock of the need to actually ingrain ecocide as a crime in universal jurisdiction. And it takes a step further in saying this should not only be done in peacetime, but also made sure that we take it into account as a crime when we have armed conflict. So I'd like to congratulate again our rapporteur, but also share my enthusiasm that there was a consensus in this plenary in giving strong support to actually having an international mechanism to monitor the legal infringements and address compensation claims when we do have such destruction and violation of the indivisible rights that we are trying to seek. Human rights should include in it the environmental rights, and it is a crime when it is violated. So once again, I found it very heartening that there is consensus in this Assembly to the report that was drafted in our committee. Thank you very much.
Merci Madame la Présidente. La discussion générale est close. La Commission des questions sociales, de la santé et du développement durable a présenté un projet de résolution sur lequel 3 amendements et 2 sous-amendements ont été déposés et un projet de recommandation sur lequel 3 amendements et 2 sous-amendements ont été déposés. Les amendements seront appelés dans l'ordre dans lequel ils s'appliquent au texte, tel que publié dans le recueil des amendements. Mes chers collègues, je vous rappelle que le temps d'intervention pour chaque amendement est limité à 30 secondes. Nous allons tout d'abord examiner le projet de résolution. L'amendement numéro 1 fait l'objet d'un sous-amendement de la Commission. La parole est à Madame Olena Komenko pour soutenir l'amendement 1. Vous avez 30 secondes.
Dear colleagues, Mr. Rapporteur, we do believe that it's not only important to support establishment of the standard methodologies for collection of evidence for the environmental harm and also for calculation of the damage and related capacity building efforts. We have our experience, tragic experience in Ukraine, and our authorities have developed 7 methodologies to calculate environmental harm. We hope that no any country will have the same precedent as we do, but standard methodologies for calculation damages is also very important. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Merci Madame Komenko. Nous en venons au sous-amendement. La parole est à Monsieur John Howell pour le soutenir au nom de la Commission.
I have tried in these amendments to seek a compromise with the person who is putting them forward, because I agree with many of the points that she has made. And in this one, I would just like to take out the words "and calculation of environmental damage and related capacity building efforts," because I think they confuse the message of the report, and to keep it as straightforward as possible.
Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre le sous-amendement? Quel est l'avis de l'auteur de l'amendement sur le sous-amendement?
Yes, I'm against sub-amendment.
Avis de l'auteur donc de l'amendement. Donc la Commission est évidemment en faveur de ce sous-amendement. Nous allons procéder au vote sur le sous-amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. Et le sous-amendement est adopté. Nous en revenons à l'amendement numéro 1. Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre l'amendement ainsi sous-amendé? Quel est l'avis de la commission?
Unanimously in favor.
Nous allons procéder au vote sur l'amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage. Et donc l'amendement est adopté. La parole est à Madame Olena Komenko pour soutenir l'amendement numéro 2.
Dear colleagues, please support this amendment. We would like to provide an example of more open-minded interpretation used in cyberspace domain. States are exchanging and sharing their positions on the applicable international law, and it may serve as an example to shape a framework in more open-ended manner. So the same we should employ for in this domain, in domain of environmental harm as a result of armed conflict. Thank you.
Merci Madame Komenko. Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre l'amendement? Monsieur le rapporteur.
I did try to seek a compromise on this, but I don't think it is possible. It is the use of the term, the official interpretation of applicable international environment laws, where we need the flexibility to be able to approach the issue much more broadly. So I would reject this particular amendment.
Quel est l'avis de la commission?
The committee rejected by 2/3 majority.
L'amendement rejeté à l'avis des 2/3 de la commission. Nous allons procéder au vote sur l'amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. L'amendement est rejeté. L'amendement 3 fait l'objet d'un sous-amendement de la commission. La parole est à Madame Olena Komenko pour soutenir l'amendement numéro 3.
Dear colleagues, we should protect areas that might need to acquire special attention. And I know the position of Mr. Rapporteur on these specific examples, nuclear power plants and hydropower plants, but it is just example. This means that it's inclusive but not limited to saying in legal terms. Thank you.
Nous en venons au sous-amendement. La parole est à Monsieur John Howell pour le soutenir au nom de la Commission.
Thank you. I am happy with the beginning part of this amendment, up to and areas that might need to acquire a special protection status. But when you put in examples of this, it automatically tends to want people to exclude other examples, and I don't think we need to make that exclusion. So I would reject it. Or I would propose a sub-amendment just to take out those words.
Quel est l'avis de l'auteur de l'amendement sur le sous-amendement? Madame Komenko.
do not agree with this sub-amendment because, as I explained, this is not narrowing, this is not limiting us to consider only nuclear power plants and hydropower plants. This was provided as an example, this wording in brackets. Thank you.
Quel est l'avis de la Commission?
The committee accepted the sub-amendment by 2/3 majority.
Nous allons procéder au vote sur le sous-amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. Le sous-amendement est adopté. Nous en venons à l'amendement numéro 3. Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre l'amendement ainsi sous-amendé? Quel est l'avis de la Commission?
The committee accepted.
Nous allons procéder au vote sur l'amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. L'amendement numéro 3 est accepté. Nous allons maintenant procéder au vote sur le projet de résolution contenu dans le document 156-74 ainsi amendé. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. Et donc la résolution est adoptée. Nous en venons maintenant au projet de recommandation. L'amendement 4 a fait l'objet d'un sous-amendement de la Commission. La parole est à M. Oleski Goncharenko pour soutenir l'amendement 4.
Thank you very much. In this amendment, we are speaking about certain areas which should be especially protected, and we are speaking about conventions. Because all conventions which are for the moment ratified and part of international law in the defense of environment, they mostly don't speak about possibility of war at all. And we need to change this, preparing new conventions. So that is why it is so important.
Nous en venons au sous-amendement. La parole est à M. John Howell pour le soutenir au nom de la Commission.
Thank you. As I have stressed throughout this morning, I have tried to keep the first part of this report exclusive of areas related to one particular country. I would therefore like to propose a sub-amendment that takes out, for example, the Convention on the Protection of the Black Sea to the end of that paragraph and leave only the beginning of that paragraph in as the amendment. So I introduce a sub-amendment to remove that paragraph.
Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre le sous-amendement?
I would like to say that I support, in general, what you're saying. I wanted, by this example, to show why in such conventions it is important to say about possibility of war. And, for example, in Convention on Black Sea, there is no. But I agree with the author. We can just leave the main important part without example. Thank you.
Quel est l'avis de la Commission? Elle est en faveur de la sous-amendement?
Yes, the committee accepted the sub-amendment.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Nous allons procéder au vote sur le sous-amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. Le sous-amendement est adopté. Nous en revenons à l'amendement numéro 4. Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre l'amendement ainsi sous-amendé? Quel est l'avis de la commission?
The committee accepted as amended.
Nous allons procéder au vote sur l'amendement ainsi sous-amendé. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. Et l'amendement 4 est adopté. La parole est à M. Oleski-Goncharenko pour soutenir l'amendement 5.
And now this is very important amendment because yes, it says us that there are very important areas, and we urge the member states to foresee the demilitarization of such areas. So it means welcome Mr. Putin, because he is not member state, he doesn't care about any of our rules, is to say if you don't want war, just destroy your army. Okay, you will destroy, but your aggressor will not. To protect your cities, do not protect them, do not fight for them, just leave them, and then aggressor will make genocide inside. So I understand the idea, but it's a wishful thinking of a wonderful world, which unfortunately doesn't exist, at least now. So please support this amendment.
Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre l'amendement? Quel est l'avis de la commission? Ah, pardon. Monsieur Howell, contre.
This is a difficult amendment. I have every sympathy with the aims of this, but we had advice from the legal people within the Council that it seeks to protect the environment only against aggressors, not defenders, and we want it protected against everyone. And I think, therefore, that it's politically and legally problematic. The mention of Article 51 doesn't help. It seeks to alter Article 51 here when it is not an article of this chamber, but is an article of the UN Charter.
Quel est l'avis de la commission, Madame la Présidente?
The committee rejected by 2/3 majority.
Nous allons procéder au vote sur l'amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. L'amendement 5 est rejeté. L'amendement 6 fait l'objet d'un sous-amendement de la Commission. La parole est à M. Oleski-Goncharenko pour soutenir l'amendement 6.
In this amendment, we are speaking about elaborating of the recommendations to member states to protect of critical infrastructure, the damage of which we can cause huge consequences. There is sub-amendment of rapporteur, and I want to say that I support it. It's taking out part of the amendment, but the main idea, the main core to protect these areas is inside, so I support sub-amendment. Thank you.
Nous en venons au sous-amendement. La parole est à M. John Howell pour le soutenir au nom de la Commission.
Thank you. This is another amendment that I've sought to make a compromise on by introducing a sub-amendment to take out the specific words relating to specific assets within this amendment, because once you include those assets, it starts to exclude other assets as well.
Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre le sous-amendement? Quel est l'avis? Oui. Vous l'avez déjà donné exactement. Nous allons procéder au vote sur le sous-amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. Et le sous-amendement est adopté. Nous en venons à l'amendement 6. Quelqu'un demande-t-il la parole contre l'amendement ainsi sous-amendé? Quel est l'avis de la commission?
The committee accepted.
Procéder au vote sur l'amendement. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat et l'amendement 6 est adopté. Nous allons maintenant procéder au vote sur le projet de recommandation contenu dans le document 156-74 ainsi amendé. Je vous rappelle que la majorité requise est celle des 2/3 des suffrages exprimés. Le scrutin est ouvert. Le scrutin est clos. Je demande l'affichage du résultat. La recommandation est adoptée. Je félicite le rapporteur pour la recommandation. Et nous allons changer de présidence.
Dear colleagues, the next item on the agenda is the debate on the report titled Contact Tracing Applications, Ethical, Cultural and Educational Challenges, document number 15648. presented by Mr. Duncan Baker on behalf of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. We shall also hear an opinion from Mr. Vladimir Vardanyan on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, document number 15660. In order to finish by 1 o'clock, I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 12:40 to allow time for the reply and vote on the draft resolution. I call Mr. Baker, Rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for everyone coming. It's both a privilege and a pleasure to be back in Strasbourg once again. And I want to thank everybody that has helped me with this report. It is the first time that I have been a rapporteur, and it has been an extremely enjoyable experience to talk about contact tracing and the ethical and social dilemmas that that brings. Yesterday we had a culture committee, and I'm very pleased to be able to say that it was unanimous in favour of all of the sub-amendments. And I thank my friend here from Armenia, Vladimir Vardanyan, who has helped and supported me through the legal committee and made this such a seamless process. But I also stress my thanks to the whole committee who has supported me through this whole process. Contact tracing applications are something that most governments and indeed people are now familiar with. Their emergence into the public mind was hastened by the pandemic, and in its wake we are now able to reflect and to evaluate. This, of course, throws up many dilemmas for us. Health priorities, health management, but also issues to think about more widely. Data misuse, surveillance, monitoring, the dilemmas around data protection. Contact tracing applications have evolved, but we have to question sometimes how effective they are. The time pressures in a worldwide health crisis has given us many of these issues to now think about. And as this report now seeks to demonstrate, a key part of this process lies in addressing the several difficult challenges from ethical to cultural and even educational considerations which face us now. These must be discussed and dealt with before any state rollout of contact tracing applications can feasibly take place. And this is what this report is all about. It aims to shine a light on a nascent and therefore largely untouched subject. Moreover, it is worth noting there currently exists little substantial scientific evidence of the impact of contact tracing applications and their effectiveness. And this is a hurdle that we have to overcome and a gap that we must all learn to fill. The draft resolution in this report details many recommendations for Council of Europe member states. The list is by no means exhaustive, but rather a good starting place from which governments can think seriously and deeply about CTAs. To my mind, many of the recommendations are good old common sense and merely put into writing what I hope any sensible and thoughtful government would already be considering. For example, the resolution's recommendations encourage member states to make sure that digital health technologies are part of a comprehensive national epidemiological strategy based on careful impact and effectivity evaluations, or to ensure the collection of people's data is backed up by legitimate public health objectives and keep the public well informed about public health issues and the benefits digital technologies can bring with them. Moreover, these recommendations actively promote the signature and ratification of Convention 108 and the modernised one on a global level, including through working with supranational institutions collaboratively, thereby allowing governments to share experiences and best practices. Data protection standards must be considered as an advantage in conditions of uncertainty, such as a pandemic. However, these regulations must be interpreted in a way that allows for detailed data collection with appropriate safeguards, and we must always strike the right balance between data protection standards and health impact assessments must be struck not only to help fight the current pandemics and future ones, but also to design future technology aimed at tackling future health crises. I hope that you will agree with me on the sensible nature of these recommendations in the report. For me, they form a solid base upon which CTAs can be looked at and implemented in a safe, effective and meaningful way. And as I say, they are not holistic, but they form a point from which we can all start and base upon which we can build. As I said consistently throughout this report's main stages and processes of refinement, on a very basic level, these recommendations are a plea for member states and their governments to think carefully before embarking upon the widespread rollout of CTAs during a public health crisis. We must understand these technologies and their impacts and ensure the necessary provisions and guidance is there before condoning their state-backed adoption and use. As I said at the beginning of my speech, I am incredibly grateful to receive the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights comments on this report and welcome their support and guidance here. Their amendments, they are thoughtful, and yesterday the few sub-amendments that we had were accepted to help clarify the scope of the recommendations and to maintain a key message of the report, namely that a greater amount of data is needed by the scientific community for research purposes and health impact assessments with the appropriate safeguards. Thank you all once again for your time and your attention and for your support with this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. I now call Mr. Vardanian, the rapporteur of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, to present the committee's opinion. You have 3 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, today I am presenting the opinion of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights on a report of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media on contact tracing applications prepared by Mr. Duncan Baker. The report considers specifically the ethical, cultural and educational challenges of such applications. The report, in my view, is a helpful contribution in considering the important issues and challenges posed by digital health technologies, such as contract tracing applications. The Committee on Legal Affairs suggested some amendments designed to supplement and not in any way to contradict the valid contribution from the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media. Firstly, the Committee suggests some amendments to highlight the requirements of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The draft resolution quite rightly focuses on the importance of data protection as protected under Council of Europe Convention 108 and Convention 108+. Amendments 2 and 4 and Amendment 8, as sub-amended, additionally highlight the important role played by the right to private life protected under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Secondly, the draft resolution quite rightly focuses on data protection. Amendments 5, 7 and 9 as sub-amendment and Amendment 10 contain some minor amendments to make clear specific data protection, namely the obligation to ensure that any retention of data continues to be justified and the requirement that consent must be freely given, specific, informed and unambiguous. Thirdly, it is important to acknowledge that different considerations may apply when dealing with the personal data or contact tracing of children. Amendment 6, as sub-amended, therefore seeks to acknowledge that whenever digital application either target children or could be used by children, specific rules exist and enhanced protection is required. Such an approach is important to ensure that children are adequately protected whenever we may use these technologies. We have also suggested a few other minor amendments to ensure appropriate references, for example, to previous resolution of the Assembly. I am grateful for the constructive approach by the reporter, Mr. Duncan Baker, and the Committee on Culture in considering the amendments and sub-amendments. I can confirm that I am content with those as a constructive way of addressing the points set out in the opinion. In summary, this is a useful report. The opinion of the Legal Committee merely sought to supplement some of the references related to the legal and human rights considerations that are of relevance of this subject matter and that warrant inclusion in the Assembly's final resolution. I can further support the sub-amendments in addressing the points raised in the opinion and congratulate my friend Duncan, the reporter, and the Committee on Culture, Sciences, Education and Media on this report. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Vardanian. In the debate, I call first Madame Mariette Karamanli on behalf of the group of Socialists. Madame Karamanli, you have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le rapporteur. Chers collègues, je souhaite ici donc remercier notre collègue rapporteur pour ses constats et propositions relatifs aux applications à visée de santé publique utilisant justement des données, des technologies de traçage et donc des traitements automatisés de données. Il inscrit donc ces recommandations dans une triple perspective. La balance entre les avantages présumés du traçage au regard d'un bénéfice, au fait peu évalué, et d'inconvénients importants, notamment en termes d'atteinte à la vie privée, une acceptabilité, je dirais, plus ou moins forte par des populations et les citoyens, et le choix qui doit rester volontaire de faire avec, et les fractures sociales, les discriminations dont leur usage est porteur. À la suite donc de cette triple préoccupation, vous mentionnez aussi la nécessité d'un cadre probant et protection de gestion des données, d'évaluer l'impact en termes de santé publique et de donner justement toute leur place à la transparence et au débat public et au contrôle parlementaire. La Commission des affaires juridiques et des droits de l'homme a souhaité aussi renforcer la cohérence des dispositifs par des amendements rappelant, entre autres, justement, que les droits des personnes ne doivent pas être perçus comme étant opposés à l'intérêt général, que la durée de la conservation des données est aussi un élément de proportionnalité du dispositif par rapport à l'objectif recherché et que les droits des enfants sont aussi à protéger. Donc, nous ne pouvons que souscrire, le groupe socialiste, à ces précisions bienvenues. 3 points seulement nous paraissent devoir recevoir une attention complémentaire soutenue. D'une part, les effets d'une telle surveillance peuvent être différenciés selon les groupes socio-économiques concernés. Certains publics sont plus vulnérables face à la maladie ou moins accessibles aux soins. D'autres ne disposent pas ou moins de moyens techniques et supports indispensables, par exemple un smartphone. Et en tout cas de cause, la dimension sociale de la santé doit être prise en compte de façon transparente et les éventuels biais exposés et discutés. D'autre part, ces dispositifs ont un coût possiblement élevé pour des résultats limités. Il est donc de notre devoir d'être attentifs à ce que les deniers publics ou sociaux soient les mieux utilisés au regard d'un bénéfice qui doit être le plus large, au moins discriminatoire. L'amoindrissement des droits individuels et libertés publiques a aussi un coût social et économique. Enfin, bon nombre d'applications des grandes entreprises technologiques du net, comme les GAFA, utilisent les données de santé personnelle comme des ressources pour alimenter leur monopole, rendre plus captifs leurs clients et utilisateurs et proposer des produits et services peu utiles à la santé personnelle et collective. Donc il faut plus de transparence, alors même que la data est au cœur de notre monde, sa gestion, sa conservation et sa commercialisation restent du domaine de l'occulte, et il faut aussi envisager un observatoire de la donnée de santé, publique et privée, qui scrute seulement ce qui se passe, qui soit capable de mettre en garde et que le Parlement développe un horizon scanning sur ces sujets, je dirais, sous l'égide du Conseil de l'Europe, ils puissent travailler le sujet, mieux contrôler et proposer des solutions nouvelles et innovantes. Notre groupe soutiendra en tout cas le projet de résolution et nous invitons à pouvoir poursuivre ce travail. Merci.
Thank you, Madame Karamanli. The next speaker on our list on behalf of the EPP CD group is Madame Marie-Christine Delot. You have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le rapporteur, chers collègues. Au nom du groupe PPE, merci Monsieur Bakker pour ce rapport. La lutte contre la pandémie de Covid-19 a engendré un recours important à des applications de traçage des contacts pour identifier les personnes susceptibles d'avoir été contaminées ou assurer le respect des règles de confinement. Malgré l'intérêt de ces technologies en matière de santé publique, les populations ont manifesté une certaine réticence vis-à-vis de leur généralisation, essentiellement en raison des menaces que cela pourrait constituer pour le droit au respect de la vie privée et plus largement les droits humains et des libertés fondamentales. La politique chinoise zéro Covid et ses excès montrent que la crainte de voir la surveillance de l'épidémie se transformer en surveillance des populations n'est pas infondée. À l'opposé, les règles de protection des données ne doivent pas constituer une entrave à la santé publique. Le Conseil de l'Europe s'est déjà saisi de cette problématique. La Convention pour la protection des personnes à l'égard du traitement automatisé des données à caractère personnel, la Convention 108, et sa version modernisée, la Convention 108+, ont établi des normes de protection des données à caractère personnel. Il faut encourager les États n'ayant pas encore signé et ratifié la Convention à le faire. Face à une pandémie, une riposte efficace ne peut être que coordonnée à l'échelle internationale. Pour les autres pays, il faut s'assurer que le cadre juridique interne s'appliquant aux applications de traçage a été évalué à l'aune de la Convention et éventuellement modifié afin d'assurer un juste équilibre entre protection des données et efficacité sanitaire. Cela est nécessaire, y compris en période de crise, lorsque les autorités sont amenées à prendre des mesures extraordinaires. Pour une utilisation optimale des applications de traçage, la divulgation volontaire des données est essentielle. Le public n'y consentira que s'il est assuré que toutes les précautions sont prises, à savoir, le traitement des données doit avoir pour seul but de contribuer à une amélioration de la santé publique. Le traitement des données doit être anonymisé. Seules les autorités en charge des questions sanitaires doivent être destinataires des données collectées. Elles ne doivent pas les partager avec aucune autre autorité. Et les données collectées doivent être supprimées dès qu'elles ne sont plus utiles à la gestion de la crise sanitaire. C'est à ces conditions que la confiance du public pourra être acquise. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The next speaker on behalf of the ALDE political group is Madame Mireille Clapeau. You have the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente, Messieurs les rapporteurs, mes chers collègues. Je veux tout d'abord remercier Monsieur Duncan Baker pour ce rapport très instructif sur les défis posés par les applications de traçage de contact et d'autres technologies similaires destinées à lutter contre de futures épidémies. L'examen de votre projet de résolution nous permet de revenir sur la difficile question du juste équilibre à trouver entre la protection des données personnelles et l'efficacité de ces nouveaux outils numériques de lutte contre les épidémies. Alors que le doute s'empare de beaucoup d'esprits sur les questions de sécurité et d'intégrité, rappelons l'existence des normes de protection des données internationales comme la Convention 108+, adoptée par notre Assemblée en 2018, ou le Règlement européen pour la protection des données au sein de l'Union européenne. Celles-ci ont su apporter un encadrement juridique fonctionnel permettant le développement de ces applications tout en garantissant à leurs utilisateurs le respect de leur vie privée et de leurs libertés individuelles. Ces garanties sont indispensables à la confiance de nos concitoyens envers ces applications. Or, sans cette confiance et l'adhésion d'utilisateurs, c'est l'efficacité elle-même de ces applications qui est remise en cause. Il nous faut donc évaluer scientifiquement et avec des indicateurs internationaux reconnus ces applications pour pouvoir analyser les forces et les faiblesses de chaque système de traçage des contacts. Ces évaluations apporteront des données et une expertise encore manquantes pour un débat public et un débat parlementaire éclairé à ce sujet. 3 ans après le début de l'épidémie de Covid-19, il nous faut répondre à ces questions. Ces applications ont-elles eu l'efficacité escomptée? Les populations les plus à risque face au Covid-19, notamment les plus âgées, sont celles qui ont le moins accès à ces technologies. Ont-elles réellement bénéficié de cet outil pour se protéger du virus? Ensuite, l'investissement financier consacré au développement de ces applications, plutôt qu'à d'autres systèmes de traçage ayant déjà fait leurs preuves ou technologiquement plus sobres, est-ce que cet investissement était justifié? Et troisièmement, la demande d'adhésion de millions de citoyens à partager des données personnelles sensibles, localisation, contact, statut vaccinal, est-elle proportionnée en comparaison avec l'utilité de ces applications et les risques d'abus ou de failles de sécurité qu'elles posent? Répondre à ces questions est indispensable pour prouver que l'action publique s'est faite dans l'intérêt général, afin d'assurer le droit à la santé, à la sécurité et à la vie privée de tous. Les régimes autoritaires sont à nos portes. La surveillance technologique sur laquelle ils reposent bien souvent devrait nous questionner sur nos propres lignes rouges en matière de protection des données personnelles. Ce projet de résolution les réaffirme clairement. C'est pourquoi, au nom du groupe ALDE, nous voterons pour.
Thank you. The next speaker on behalf of the ECDA group is Ms. Nigar Arpadaray. Ms. Arpadaray, you have the floor and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, the resolution feels like a breath of fresh air after the pandemic scaremongering and a series of disturbing reports and resolutions undermining freedom of speech and human rights produced by our Assembly. We are finally getting back to our core mission, which is defending human rights, not undermining them. During the last few years, we substantially retreated the standard of human rights. It would be an oversimplification to blame solely on pandemic on it. Wars, economic turmoil, all contributed to this. The process itself is much more complex and started well before the pandemic. When the whole internet and IT industry were starting 1 generation ago, it felt differently. IT technologies seemed like the way towards more freedom and opportunities, more chances for underprivileged, more openness and education, unfiltered information, access to knowledge promised new bright future and equality for all. Time passed and apparently this technological ocean turned into a place where large corporations sought for ways to become richer and more powerful, and where an individual and his personal data became commodity, something one can buy and sell without individuals' consent or knowledge. Essentially, whales and sharks of internet feed on small fish and plankton. If it goes on like that, the corporations will continue to push the boundaries, simply due to the fact that it will give them more money and power. They will keep on explaining that contact tracing is important not only for pandemic tackling, but it's also very important for crime solving, for terrorist watch, for prevention of pedophilia or whatever. They will scare people into accepting this new reality step by step. We have to put proper checks and monitoring mechanism on such processes with people's interest in mind. Can we fully stop contact tracing? Obviously not, but I see few points, few principles that should be adopted at the gate. There should be a principle of clear agreement by a person and a real choice. The agreement should be a meaningful one. When one downloads the app, without which one can't go a shop, a restaurant, enter office building, or board a train, and the app requests OK from individual for contact tracing. Otherwise, it simply won't work. It's not a meaningful choice by the individual. It's a mere trick, illusion of choice. If you don't have an app, you can't function as a member of society. Today, this fake choice is algorithms of apps. It's a reality, and we must get rid of that. There should be a principle of total disclosure of algorithms used when contact tracing. We should not let them hide behind commercial or scrutiny considerations. People should have the right to know and what and how their data is used. Any situation where systems push through with enforcement of contact tracing using crime-solving or public good instrument, there should be a stringent systemic and individual accountability. For example, we are still waiting for answers for a number of questions which are looming from the times of COVID pandemic. Were travel bans efficient? Did the obligatory masks work? What were the mistakes made and how are they going to be fixed? And I'm not aware of any meaningful accountability case in this very messy and hardly transparent COVID public management story. There should be a mechanism of investigation and follow-up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last speaker on behalf of political groups is Mr. Kriton Ilias Arsenis. Mr. Arsenis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Of course, we're discussing about contact tracing applications. And here, we all think not only about surveillance, but also what is going to happen with all this big data. The issue of big data did not finish with Cambridge Analytica, did not finish with the manipulation of big data by Mr. Trump. It's still here, it's still so vivid today. In Greece, there is a scandal regarding the platform used for e-learning, for e-schooling during the lockdowns of the pandemic. There is the company Cisco was supposed to have given the platform for free to the Greek government. only to find out finally that the exchange was the big data, the data of all the children, of all the teachers that took part in the e-learning. This, of course, is a huge scandal. And we should have extended the scope of this resolution, not only to contact tracing applications, but all the related COVID-19 related applications and all the big data generated by them. It's a huge issue of control. This big data can be used by governments, by candidates, as we saw in the case of Mr. Trump, and of course, by multinationals, by big companies. So when the report says favors the voluntary permission of the use of personal data in order so that people can say, okay, I'm willing to provide my personal data so that you can assess the effectiveness of the application. There's also a big issue. At least in Greece, as far as I know, in most countries, if not in all countries, these voluntary permissions are given as a prerequisite to access services. So in most applications, if you don't give this permission, you don't go further. So we should be very careful with what is voluntary, truly voluntary, and what is hiddenly obligatory, compulsory. Also, we are going to discuss, of course, further on in the discussion of amendments, our political party will be against narrowing the scope of this resolution. We believe we would seriously need to expand the scope to cover all applications that are related to COVID-19 and all the big data created by them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Konstantinos Efstatiu. Mr. Efstatiu, you have the floor.
Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω και να συγχαρώ τον συνάδελφο κύριο Μπέικερ για την πολύ επίκαιρη έκθεση του που βρίσκεται ενώπιον μας και ιδίως για τη θέση ότι η επέμβαση στην άσκηση του δικαιώματος στην ιδιωτική ζωή θα πρέπει να είναι περιορισμένη στο χρόνο και στο εύρος. Γι' αυτό το λόγο θα υπερψηφίσω την έκθεση και τις τροπολογίες της Επιτροπής Νομικών και Ανθρωπίνων Δικαιωμάτων που εμβαθύνουν το κράτος δικαίου. Αναλόγως της οπτικής γωνίας του καθενός από εμάς, θα μπορούσε κάποιος να ισχυριστεί ότι η πανδημία ανάγκασε από τη μια ή έδωσε την ευκαιρία από την άλλη στις αρμόδιες αρχές, στα κράτη, να εφαρμόσουν άμεσα και νέα και εξελιγμένα συστήματα επεξεργασίας δεδομένων, παρακολούθησης, περιλαμβανομένων και εφαρμογών ηχνηλάτησης επαφών, την ίδια στιγμή που η χρήση αυτών των τεχνολογιών εμπεριέχει σοβαρούς κινδύνους που έγκυται κυρίως στην προστασία των προσωπικών δεδομένων και της διαφύλαξης της ιδιωτικής ζωής και επικοινωνίας εκάστου. Πόσο δε μάλλον, όταν για τη μεγάλη πλειοψηφία των πολιτών η χρήση της νέας τεχνολογίας και η ενδεχόμενη υποκλοπή, επεξεργασία και καταχρηστική εκμετάλλευση προσωπικών δεδομένων είναι ορατές πραγματικότητες, τις οποίες δεν είναι σε θέση να ελέγξουν ούτε οι ίδιοι, καθώς δεν διαθέτουν ούτε την πρόσβαση ούτε και τις απαραίτητες τεχνικές γνώσεις και δεξιότητες για περιορισμό των όποιων αρνητικών συνεπειών. Οι Ευρωπαίοι πολίτες και οι χρήστες έχουν δικαίωμα προστασίας έναντι κάθε είδους κατάχρησης, με νομικά καθαρούς και απλούς στην εφαρμογή δεσμευτικούς όρους, οι οποίοι να επιβάλλουν την ύπαρξη τεκμηριωμένων λόγων φύλαξης και αποθήκευσης των προσωπικών δεδομένων, περιορισμένα στον χρόνο. Προπάντων, η χρήση των τεχνολογιών θα πρέπει να διέπεται από ένα αυστηρό νομικό πλαίσιο, που να κατοχυρώνει στην πράξη την εμπιστευτικότητα των προσωπικών δεδομένων, να εγγυάται το δικαίωμα στην ιδιωτική ζωή σε μια δημοκρατική κοινωνία και κράτος δικαίου και να επιβάλλει λογοδοσία σε όλους όσους αυθαιρετούν. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you. I call next Mr. François Calvet. Mr. Calvet, you have the floor and you have 3 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, mes chers collègues, de nombreuses applications de traçage des contacts sont disponibles pour être installées, souvent gratuitement, sur les téléphones portables. Ces applications ont été utilisées par les gouvernements des États membres de notre organisation pour tenter de limiter les contaminations durant la pandémie Covid-19. Comme nous le rappelons souvent au sein de cette Assemblée, le débat public et la transparence sur l'action du gouvernement en la matière sont nécessaires pour susciter la confiance des citoyens. Ces normes relatives à la vie privée sont aujourd'hui retranscrites dans la Convention 108 modernisée, dite Convention 108+, et je souhaite que tous les États membres de notre organisation puissent la ratifier. J'observe qu'au-delà de cette convention, il existe au sein de l'Union européenne un règlement général pour la protection des données, le RGPD. Celui-ci propose des normes élevées en matière de protection des données à caractère personnel. La complémentarité entre le RGPD et la Convention 108+, est manifeste. Les deux instruments permettant d'assurer un haut niveau de protection de la vie privée et des données à caractère personnel. Si la Convention du Conseil de l'Europe est moins détaillée que le RGPD et la directive police-justice, elle repose sur des principes communs. Le principe de finalité, le principe de proportionnalité, de pertinence, le principe d'une durée de conservation limitée, le principe de sécurité, l'existence de droits pour les personnes tels que les droits d'accès aux données, le droit de rectification, encore le droit à l'effacement, de la même façon, les droits des personnes concernées, la protection de ces droits par les autorités de contrôle, ainsi que les obligations des responsables de traitement se trouvent réaffirmées. Par décision du 9 avril 2019, le Conseil de l'Union européenne a d'ailleurs autorisé les États membres de l'Union à ratifier la Convention 108 modernisée dans l'intérêt de l'Union. Cette décision était nécessaire dans la mesure où le protocole couvre pour partie des domaines relevant de la compétence exclusive de l'Union européenne. Je souhaite donc que le commissaire à la protection des données du Conseil de l'Europe et le Comité européen de la protection des données instituent par le règlement de la RGPD pour l'Union européenne puissent s'assurer de la mise en œuvre harmonieuse des deux normes dans l'intérêt des Européens. Je salue en tout cas, en tout état de cause, les conclusions de notre rapporteur et voterai ce projet de résolution.
Thank you. Now I call Mr. Attila Tilki. Mr. Tilki, you have the floor.
The Hungarian Virus Radar app was launched on the 13th of May 2020 in maintenance of Ministry of Innovation and Technology. The app was developed by a Northern Macedonian company called NextSense and offered to Hungary for free of charge. It is one of the only two EU apps which use the centralized app architecture. The app could be installed on citizens' smartphones to capture anonymized interactions between smartphones by using of Bluetooth technology, who is closer than 2 meters and who has been running the same application for more than 20 minutes in the last 14 days. If the test is positive for coronavirus, the users can indicate this through the application, and the public health authority can also use the contacts of the infected phone for contact tracing. However, with regard to the expectation of the public health profession, the application professional parameters don't meet the epidemiological expectation in all respects, so in practice it was ultimately not used to serve official purposes. According to the decision of Operational Tribe, the virus radar system and mobile application was phased out on the 25th of June 2021, and its IT background support was terminated. Since its launch, the virus radar app has been downloaded more than 995,000 times. App downloads as a share of the population 1%. App architecture centralized. The anonymized interaction keys are uploaded to the central server operated by Public Health Authority, which performs the assessment of risk interactions. Hungary was one of the only two EU countries to choose the centralized app approach alongside France. Currently, apps with a centralized architecture can be connected to European Federation Gateway Service, which enables apps from different member states to talk each other and exchange cross-border notification in case of defected exposure. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ms. Katia Dekanoidze. She is not on her seat, so we will move on the next speaker. Next speaker is Mr. Mehmet Mehdi Eker. Mr. Eker, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear President, dear colleagues. Firstly, many thanks to the Rapporteur for his subtle report. Since the COVID-19 pandemic started, governments and stakeholders used data analytics and digital technologies to identify people exposed to the coronavirus and stop onward transmission. Contact tracing applications were the primary resources used for this purpose during the pandemic. While these apps can help prevent infections and are a valuable public health tool, they also raise a question about people's privacy. This application collects their users' data on an industrial scale. States, political parties, various organizations, and businesses hold remarkably detailed and powerful information about us. More and more aspects of our lives are being digitally tracked, stored, used, and unfortunately misused. This issue could easily lead to the violation of people's private lives. Since every person should enjoy the right to privacy, both in conventional and digital ways, the data which is collected by these applications must not be used beyond its intended purpose. Furthermore, there are reasonable concerns regarding these applications beyond the privacy issue. As the report mentions, there are sorts of contact tracing applications for different purposes, and these are being used not just to monitor and categorize, but to influence as well. The governments or developers could use the data collected via applications to scare or manipulate people to waive their basic rights. These phenomena could lead us to a non-democratic society. In this sense, since these applications are open to abuse in a way that diminishes human rights, they must be closely monitored and ensure that they comply with the data protection standards. We cannot ignore the digital technology's value for human rights and development is enormous. However, its unquestionable benefits do not cancel out its unmistakable risks. Thus, Assembly and Member States must be vigilant and take the necessary precautions to protect democracy also in the digital world. For this purpose, I sincerely support the suggestions given in the report, especially on the issues of monitoring the applications, seeking consent in data sharing, transparency of applications, and informing the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Bjorn Levi Gunnarsson. Mr. Gunnarsson, you have the floor.
Thank you. It is in trying times when human rights have the most value and at the same time are hardest to defend. The desire to protect public health with mass surveillance via contact tracing application is understandable from the perspective of a practical person. This is an option that could possibly have a very big impact on public health. But it is in the face of these options that breach the right to a private life, a right that is so precious that we must ask ourselves what are the possible consequences. The possibility of Big Brother technology is at the same time as appealing as it is dangerous. So we must be cautious and provide guidelines on how this wonderful piece of technology that many of us carry around in our pockets is to be used properly to protect our most basic human rights. Our existence cannot be the plaything of the dystopian Gattaca or the food of data brokers whose goals were made apparent by the Cambridge Analytica case, where the access to swaying the opinion of nations and their election was for sale. The things that once were difficult are now easy to do. Data literally flows, streams out of our pockets into the pockets of various corporations and governments. If not by choice of the user, often uninformed one, then by spying, as the leaks from multiple whistleblowers have revealed to us. Whistleblowers and those that report on them, journalists, that various governments do their utmost to track down and punish with impunity. I welcome this report and its focus on health-related applications. I agree with its conclusions, but I want to give a word of caution. All too often, governments bypass ethical concern by legalizing them in some way. Here I refer to the words in the report such as, and I quote, justified by legitimate public health objectives, end quote. Here I have too often seen the excuse, but no laws were broken, when the spirit of the law was definitely broken. Just having laws to protect public health is not enough to justify the means. The laws themselves need to ensure that privacy is protected. I urge lawmakers to err on the side of caution when dealing with privacy issues. We need to demand more transparency for corporations and governments and greater protection of privacy for individuals.
Thank you. Next speaker on the list is Mr. Yuri Kamelchuk. He is not here. Oh, he's here. You have the floor. Sorry.
Thank you. Dear Chairman, dear Mr. Rapporteur, dear colleagues, contact tracing software has been the subject of considerable innovation and debate over the past few years. Ensuring health and safety is critical, but this should not come at an unacceptable cost to the privacy or civil liberties. In democracies during COVID-19, the ethical debate surrounding the use of digital health technologies has mainly concerned the extent to which they provide anonymity for individuals, the security of their personal information, and the protection of their rights as the members of a just and lawful society. Critical issues also relate to the power and control different actors have over these technologies and the data they receive, which may include not only health authorities but also other government agencies, quasi-government organizations, third sector organizations, technology companies, and various shadow players. Governments in countries such as China, South Korea, Israel, and India have implemented coercive approaches that severely violate privacy to help control the spread of COVID-19, including precise location tracking of identifiable individuals, mining of personal data, widespread facial recognition technology, and wearable devices for compliance with quarantine. In general, the citizens complied whether out of choice, conformity, and sense of collective responsibility, or because the price of non-compliance included fines, unemployment, or prison terms. In contrast, the desire for freedom from government surveillance and interference is strongly felt in Europe, and privacy is a highly political issue. Therefore, applications that use anonymous and pseudo-anonymized proximity registration have an advantage over those that use location tracking during COVID-19. However, the prospect of storing identifiers or proximity logs in a government database faces strong opposition on the grounds that people could theoretically be re-identified, the social networks mapped through contact, or the data could be used in other ways. Public trust is critical for democracies willing to implement contact tracing programs, but can be easily damaged if their privacy, utility, sustainability, accuracy, or security are questioned, or if institutions are perceived as exceeded their authority, social license to track or collect data. Thank you.
Thank you. I call next Ms. Hilka Kempi. Ms. Kempi, you have the floor and you have 3 minutes.
Madam President, Mr. Baker's report is a timely example of the various modern challenges to human rights and democracy. During the last few years, the use of contact tracing applications and other health monitoring applications have exploded. While people eagerly feed personal data, the legislation is lagging. When the pandemic hit, contact tracing applications were developed in a haste, often at the detriment of privacy and the right to family life. At some point, more than 1 million Finland had downloaded the Corona Alert app. That is a lot in a 5 million people's country. Still, it is quite hard to judge whether the application, in fact, did save lives. I agree with the resolution that such apps should only be used when they are proven to be beneficial for public health. In today's world, data technology is developing at a much faster pace than legislation. We install tracing applications in our phones to follow our children and Bluetooth sensors on personnel with diabetes, send constant information of glucose level to our mobile phones. All this improves our lives so many levels, but it also comes with several risks. What if people hack the glucose sensors and mess up their data? Or what if tracing apps are hacked, putting children at risk? At the same time, as we monitor our bodies, who owns the data? Can insurance companies buy this data and deprive people of the right to insurance based on this data? These are the worst-case scenarios, and many application developers are focusing very hard to ensure privacy and safety. We need to improve our own technology literacy and understanding to develop legislation that ensures that such technology is only used to the benefit of all. I would encourage this Assembly and national governments to also continue their work on preventing algorithm discrimination. It should be a topic of next report. Thank you for this good report.
Thank you. I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but haven't been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I call Mr. Baker, rapporteur, to reply to the debate. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much for all of the debates that I've listened to carefully. It's clear this report was one of extreme importance, and there is universal agreement around the Chamber about the importance when so many important points have been mentioned, such as trust, the right for people to have a private life, that their freedoms and their privacy is respected, and that people must have confidence in the data that is collected is used appropriately. It was for exactly this reason that this report was put together, and it's exactly this reason why we've debated this incredibly important topic and shone a light on so many matters that have been brought here this morning. This report doesn't profess to have all of the answers, but to shine a light on all of the important points that have been raised this morning. I want to thank everybody who has contributed to it. It's very rare, I think, these days in politics where people all agree on one topic, but it's very clear this morning that every contribution shares those same values here. So with that in mind, thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you. Does the chairperson of the committee, Ms. Yevgenia Kravchuk, wish to speak? You have 3 minutes.
Yes.
These little things, are following us every day. We spent with smartphones, probably more time than we spend with our families and friends. Of course, modern technologies can bring a lot of good, especially in the medical sphere, and I can tell for sure I'm coming from doctors' families and really modern technology do give a lot of good. But of course, we need to understand that data protection is also very much important. And also, from the debates as well, and it's my own opinion, that we always have to not forget about the common sense. And common sense says that people need to trust the technology to use it, and so this technology would give what those who thought it would be good to implement the results that needed. So as the chairwoman of the committee, I would like to say that the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media has shown us with today's reports that Europe must be better prepared to deal with future emergencies, also by improving the performance of digital tools such as contact tracing applications. Key message of the report by Mr. Baker is that a greater amount of detailed data is needed by the scientific community for research purposes and health impact assessments, while securing the appropriate safeguards and legal requirements flowing from the European Convention on Human Rights or Convention 108+. It's also extremely important to keep the public well informed about public health interventions, in particular regarding the impact and effectiveness of new digital technology, including via parliamentary hearing and public information campaigns, with a view to raising citizens' awareness, building citizens' trust, and strengthening the effectiveness of new technology. The report also encourages the European Union to continue developing coordinated solutions at European and international levels, including beyond the European Union, to promote safe international travel and global control of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as future threats to public health. As parliamentarians, we should make good use of these recommendations and make sure that our governments are better prepared to include digital public health technologies as part of comprehensive national epidemiologic strategy, articulated in different tools, balancing all interests at stake and based on an appropriate evaluation of its real impact and effectiveness. I would like to thank for very good cooperation of Mr. Baker, our rapporteur, and Mr. Vardanyan, the rapporteur for opinion. We indeed had a very good discussion at our committee, and Mr. Vardanyan have agreed on a number of sub-amendments intending to clarify the proposed amendments, and these were unanimously backed by our committee, and I encourage you to vote in favor of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. The debate is closed, and now we move to the amendments. The Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media has presented a draft resolution to which 10 amendments and 5 sub-amendments have been tabled. I remind you the speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1, 2, 3, 4 and 10 to the draft resolution, which were anonymously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Ms. Kravchuk?
Yes, that is correct.
Does anyone object? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand. Oh, we have an objection. You have the
You. On behalf of the UL group, we oppose Amendment A because it reduces the scope of the resolution. Thus, we propose that it's a separate discussion and vote on Amendment A. Thank you.
Now we will go to Amendment 1. I call Mr. Vardanyan to support Amendment 1. You have 30 seconds.
Actually, these amendments were agreed between me. We have discussed it in the legal committee. We have discussed it in the Committee on Culture. And I do believe that this amendment should be approved as it proposed, as sub-amended. Thank you.
Yes, I understand you, but we have an objection, so I needed to do so. You understand. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I don't see. The committee anonymously approved Amendment 1. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. I call for the result to be displayed. The vote is closed. So amendment 1 is agreed. We now move to amendment number 2. I call Mr. Vardanian to support the amendment. You have 30 seconds.
Once again, this amendment has been discussed in the legal committee. Afterwards, it was discussed in the committee on culture. We have full understanding with the reporters, and I'm in favor of this amendment. Actually, it is just mentioning and stressing the role of the European Court of Human Rights and the Commission of Human Rights on this issue, and it is quite important. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? The committee unanimously approved Amendment 2. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. So the Amendment 2 is agreed. We now move to Amendment number 3. Amendment is anonymously approved by the committee, but I call Mr. Vardanian to support Amendment number 3 because we have procedure to follow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment number 3 is actually trying to provide the holistic approach between activities and the reports of our committee approved during the COVID, and it's actually a continuation interconnected with the contact tracing applications, and the committee is in favor, and we have consensus also with the reporter, so I'm in favor of this amendment.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? So the committee anonymously approved amendment number 3. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment number 3 is agreed. We now move to amendment number 4. I call Mr. Vardanian to support amendment number 4. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment number 4 is rather of technical nature, and it's intended to emphasize the right to private life, and that's why we are in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? The committee anonymously approved amendment number 4. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 4 is agreed. Now we move to amendment number 5 and sub-amendment. I call Mr. Vardanian to support amendment number 5. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since we are addressing to the data protection issues, and this amendment is quite necessary to emphasize that the data protection should have the necessary duration, and we have supported this amendment, and I would like just to say that just to go ahead, that it was supported also with the sub-amendment proposed by the reporter. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to I call Mr. Baker, rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment. Sorry. You have the floor.
We are in support of the sub-amendment.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak against the sub-amendment? So no one. What is the opinion of the mover of the amendment on the sub-amendment?
We actually, Madam Chair, I agree with sub-amendment, and I already said in my speech that amendments are welcome with the sub-amendments agreed. Thank you.
Yes, I understand, but I have procedure to follow. Sorry, you have to understand me. The committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment, so I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. Now we come to the main amendment, number 5, as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No one. So what is the opinion of the committee?
Unanimously in favor of the sub-amended.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 5, as amended, is agreed. Now we move to amendment number 6. I call Mr. Vardanian to support the amendment. You have 30 seconds.
Madam Chair, this amendment is actually designed to emphasize the right of the child and the children's rights and right to children's privacy and right to respect their personal data protection. So we are in favor.
Thank you. I call Mr. Baker, rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment.
We agree with the sub-amendment and the protection of children and have done some rewording for this sub-amendment and agree with the Legal Affairs Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak against the sub-amendment? What is the opinion of the mover of the amendment on the sub-amendment?
In favor, we just reword that sentence.
Thank you. The committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment. I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. We now move to the main amendment, 6 as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee?
Unanimously in favor.
I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 6 as amended is agreed. Now we move to the amendment number 7 and sub-amendment. I call Mr. Vardanian to support amendment number 7. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment is actually designed to provide the necessary information, saying that during the data processing, the consent should be freely given, specific, and unambiguous, and this was discussed in the legal committee, it was discussed in the Committee of Culture. We have a consensus with the reporter, and I'm in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mr. Baker, rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment.
We are in support. We have just simplified some of the wording to avoid any repetition and in total support with one another.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak against the sub-amendment? As I understand, Mr. Vardanian, you are in favor of sub-amendment?
In favor.
Thank you. The committee is obviously in favor, so I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. Now we come to the main amendment 7 as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee? I understand that you agree.
Unanimously in favor.
Okay. I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 7 as amended is agreed. I call Mr. Vardanian to support amendment number 8. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like just to support amendment number 10. It is actually a message to the future that that this kind of standards should be also used if in the future we will face the health crises. Thank you. And we are in favor.
Thank you. It is amendment number 8. I call Mr. Baker, rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment.
We are in total support.
Thank you. I understand that Mr. Vardanian the committee supports the sub-amendment.
We fully support the sub-amendment since it is just rephrasing of the amendment.
Thank you. Thank you. I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. Now we come to the main amendment, 8, as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee?
Unanimously in favor.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 8 as amended is agreed. We now move to the amendment number 9 and some amendment. I call Mr. Vardanian to support amendment number 9. You have 30 seconds.
Madam Chair, this amendment has been discussed and got the unanimous support in both committees, so I am in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mr. Baker, rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment.
We are in complete support.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak against the sub-amendment? I understand that the committee agrees. Thank you. The committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment. I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. Now we come to the main amendment 9 as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee?
Unanimously in favor.
I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 9 as amended is agreed. Now we move to the last amendment. I call Mr. Vardanian to support amendment number 10. You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The same old story. This amendment was discussed duly in both committees and got full support of both committees, so I am in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? The committee unanimously approved amendment number 10. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. Amendment number 10 is agreed. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document number 15648 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution as amended in document number 15648 is adopted. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 with the agenda which was approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned.